Okay, folks, welcome back to Three's In. This next story I have for you took place on a DC-9 trip I had. I was the captain and just began the trip with this new co-pilot, new to the airlines. He'd flown regionals before, and I don't know, it was probably his second or third trip. And we took off on day one. And on the nine, we'd fly anywhere from 3 to 4 legs per day, 5 legs per day, something like that. At any rate, during one of the early flights, started asking each other, getting an appreciation of what our backgrounds were and so forth. That's usually the way these things went anyway. It was kind of rare you flew with the same guy twice at Northwest, although it did happen. Anyway, so we're flying along, and what'd you do before this? That's when he told me he was with the regionals. And I told him I'd been in the Air Force and where do you live? And he lived in Tampa. I lived in Toledo. And are you married? No. I said, no, I wasn't married. And he wasn't married. Had a 9-year-old daughter. And I told him about my kids. And he said, how long were you married? And I said, 28 years. And that kind of shocked him. He said, 28 years. Well, that's amazing. So I didn't think anything of it, just kind of let it go. And then the next leg or so, we're flying along, and he says, 28 years. He says, I can't believe. I would have thought if you had been married for 28 years that you might want to make a go of it or try to make it work. Well, now I started to get a little bit uncomfortable because he's getting into an area that I didn't think was much of his business to begin with. So I just kind of let the conversation shut itself down and let it go. So the next day we're flying south, I think maybe to Raleigh. I can't remember. And we're at cruise. We're flying along. And he says, 28 years. He says, that's incredible just to give all that up. And I thought, okay, let's have some fun with this bozo. So I said, I suppose I could share this with you. I said, you know how these damn flight rooms are in the up in operations. Rumors get out, this, that, and the other. So rather than let rumors fly, I said, let me kind of give you some background on this. I said, my wife and I, for years, hadn't really been getting along together that well. And it got to a point where we began to take separate vacations. So at that point, or actually just before that point, I created this character in my mind based off of the houseboy in Robin Williams' movie, The Birdcage. Hank Azaria played the part. So I kind of created that image in my mind and took off from there. So I said, on this one vacation, I don't know where she went. I went down to Costa Rica, and I said, that's when I met Armando. And I knew I couldn't live the lie anymore. At that point, I thought he was going to crawl out the right side of the airplane. I didn't realize how homophobic that kid was until then. And when I saw that reaction from it, both in his body language and his face, I just couldn't let it go. I said, I started a conversation with Armando, and we found a lot of things we had in common that we just enjoyed. I said, for the whole 2 weeks I was down in Costa Rica, we just had a ball. And I said, as time went along, I helped him get a green card so he could come up here and work. And I said, that was the time I decided I need to get honest with my wife and just kind of tell her how things were. Well, now this kid's turning pale. So I said, okay. And I said, when he came up, he didn't have a place to stay, so I invited him to move in, and he's just been a wonderful companion ever since. I said, we've come to find out we enjoy the same kind of music. We both like to cook. And I said, one of the things I didn't realize was he actually likes to iron. Of course, I was thinking of Hank Azaria in that one scene there in the movie, and I said, take a look at the creases in this shirt. I said, you just don't find this kind of laundry at basic laundromats. They don't put the creases in as nice. This is, well, this kid now, he's more nervous than a whore in church. And so the conversation just kind of died off and went flat from there on out. So we land in Raleigh and went in, and there was a problem with the airplane. And so they terminated our trip because the airplane was unserviceable for passenger flights. But they signed us off on a one-time flight over from Raleigh over to Atlanta so we could get some maintenance for it, to put it into maintenance. And then they just released us from our trip. Well, when we flew over there, everything was kind of quiet, if you will. He was probably thinking about Armando. But anyway, just kind of let it go and got into Atlanta. And that's when they released us from our trip. And we both went our own separate ways. I came back to Detroit, and he went on to Tampa. Never thought a thing about it. Never, just let it go. And then I thought, oh crap, I probably should have sorted it out. Screw it. So anyway, just kind of let it go. Then about a year and a half later, I ran into him again on a trip. He showed up, and I recognized him right away. But he wasn't sure who I was, but he knew he'd seen me from somewhere. So we take off, and as we're flying together, I really came to like the kid. He was a nice guy, and so we took off and flew the trip, and he knew there wasn't something. He knew there was something that wasn't. He knew he'd flown with me before. He thought he had, but he wasn't sure what it was. So we flew the first day, and I decided to let him stew on it for the first day, and then the second day, he says, you know what? He says, you're really familiar, but he says, I can't put things together. And I said, well, the last time we flew together, I told you about Armando, my roommate. Oh, yeah, that's it. So he kind of was a, whoa. And the things weren't adding up. He really enjoyed flying with me, but that homophobic thing kind of got in the way. But I said, things took a little different turn, and we're both okay now. We're friends, and we both went our separate way. And he said, are you dating anyone now? And he said, no, not particularly. We just let it go. I said, how about yourself? Well, I noticed the night before on the crew van when we got to our first station, he was on the phone rather secretively. And then when we came out the airplane, he was talking on his cell phone. And so when we leveled off and he looked over, he started telling me that he had this girlfriend down in Tampa. And actually, she was married to another guy about 15 years older than she was. He was in his 60s. And she would go to the gym to work out, and that's where this co-pilot I was flying with had met her. And they began a thing, if you will. And she told him, she says, you know, I just like to pick up a boy toy for 6 months or so at a time, but there's never anything serious about it. Well, unfortunately, he was falling for her, and she was in the process of cutting him loose. So we're flying along, and he told me a little bit about that. We'd land, he'd call her, and I just didn't think much about it. And so we get back into Detroit, and we landed on the last flight of the day, last flight of the trip, matter of fact. We're taxiing in, and he looks over at me, and we had to go the long way around Detroit, long way around the taxiway. And he looks over at me, and he says, would you mind if I made a call? I thought, what kind of stupid are you here? Thought I was making progress with you. And we have a stereo cockpit when we're on the ground. Actually, from the time we start engines till we get to 10,000 feet, and then from 10,000 feet until we park the airplane, we're in a stereo cockpit. So he asked that question as we're taxiing in. Well, the cockpit voice recorder's recording all this. I'm caught. So I look over at him and I said, okay. I said, I think I get it now. He says, what do you mean, sir? And I said, well, you know we're in a stereo cockpit. I said, what kind of fool would ask a question like that in a sterile cockpit environment? I said, you're really from the company down here to give me a check ride, right? Because nobody would ask that kind of a dumb question. He says, no, sir, I really want to make the call. And I said, well, no, you can't make the call. You can call her when we get into the gate. Jesus. So we taxi into the gate and shut down. And once we shut down, I thought, you know what? I put on my squadron commander hat from years ago, and I looked over at him. I said, hey, you got a minute before we go? He said, yes, sir. I said, all right. I said, let me share some things with you here. I said, I'm not going to get in your business. That's your business. But I said, the only way this relationship you have with this woman the only way it's going to go is south. That's the only way it can go. And I said, I know there's probably 2 or 3 more women in Tampa that are single that would be attractive to you. But I said, this one, I said, there's nothing but trouble written all over this. And I said, I think you're a good guy. I think you're smart, you're bright, but you're just all wrapped up with this gal. And I said, on your way home, I said, I'd offer you, lend some thought to it, and lend some thought to the impact on your daughter, your 9-year-old daughter, and then take it from there. You'll find the answer there. But I said, it's obviously eating you up. And I said, try to figure out a way to resolve it to where you're okay with yourself. And I said, this thing about Armando I told you about on the first trip. He said, yeah. I said, I just made it all up. I said, I was having too good of a time. And he just looked at me like, really? And I said, yeah. So anyway, we kind of left it at that. Didn't see him until about another year later. Ran into him in the concourse. And he says, Bob, he says, you got a minute? I said, well, yeah. He said, how you going? He says, I'm doing great. He said, I met a gal, I'm dating her, things are going well. And he said, I really appreciate you taking time to talk to me. He said, nobody's really ever done that before like that. And he said, I lent some thought to it on the way home. And he said, what you said made sense. And it made a great deal of difference for me. And he said, I just wanted to thank you for that. Those are the kind of memories that here today that I really enjoy, that maybe I said something that helped somebody. And haven't heard from him since. Don't think I will. Don't need to. We had some fun together, talking with each other and flying together. And maybe I said something along the way that helped him out. And we'll just leave it at that. Thanks for tuning in. Good to see everybody.